Have you ever walked onto a job site and solved a major mechanical conflict with a quick handshake and a clever workaround, only to realize that same instinct would fail you miserably on a professional certification exam? It's a common hurdle for seasoned engineers. In the field, we are conditioned to value speed and handshake problem solving because time is literally money. However, to master the PMI framework and pass the exam, you must deconstruct those site habits. On the site, you might take a shortcut to keep the concrete pour on schedule. But on the exam, process, rigid documentation, and rigorous planning always win. This is a mental shift from being a doer to being a planner. The golden rule here is to analyze first and act second. Think of it this way. In engineering, we know that a design flaw caught on paper costs a few dollars to fix, but a flaw caught after the steel is erected costs millions. This is why the framework insists that prevention is always preferred over inspection. We aren't just looking for mistakes, we are planning to ensure they never happen. Now, let's look at how we begin that planning process by identifying what could go wrong. Imagine you're about to break ground on a massive tunneling project. Do you wait for the first boulder to block your path before thinking about delays? Of course not. Identify risks is the continuous process of documenting individual project risks and the sources of overall risk. It isn't just a manager sitting in a trailer with a spreadsheet, it demands input from the entire team. Why? Because involving the site engineers, the foremen, and the safety officers builds psychological ownership. When the team helps identify the risks, they are more invested in preventing them. This process generates two critical artifacts that will live with you for the duration of the project: the risk register and the risk report. The risk register is your detailed log of every specific threat and opportunity, while the risk report summarizes the overall risk profile of the project. This is never a one-and-done task. It loops continuously as new phases of the infrastructure lifecycle begin. As you move from excavation to structural steel, the risk profile changes, and your identification engine must keep spinning. Once we have a list of these risks, we need a way to sort the minor hiccups from the project killers. If you've identified 500 possible risks on a bridge project, you can't realistically spend equal time planning for all of them. How do you decide where to focus? That's where qualitative risk analysis comes in. This is the subjective triage of project management. We prioritize risks by assessing two things: the probability of occurrence and the potential impact on project objectives. This process acts as a filter to remove the noise. For example, the risk of a minor tool theft might be high probability but low impact, whereas a total crane failure is low probability but catastrophic impact. However, because this is subjective, it is highly susceptible to human bias. An optimistic engineer might downplay a technical risk, while a cautious one might inflate it. As a project manager, you must act as a facilitator to identify and correct these skewed perceptions. Crucially, this process is where we assign a distinct risk owner, one person responsible for watching that specific risk. Remember, this is a mandatory filter. You cannot move to complex math or response planning without first ranking your stones through qualitative analysis. Let's look closer at the difference between the clipboard and the simulation. Many engineers get these two confused. Qualitative analysis, which we just discussed, is like a clipboard walkthrough. It's perception-based and is performed on every single risk you identify. It's fast, it's effective, and it's how you designate your risk owners. Quantitative analysis, on the other hand, is like a high-fidelity structural simulation. It is objective and mathematically driven, usually requiring specialized software to run Monte Carlo simulations. While qualitative analysis looks at individual risks, quantitative analysis analyzes the combined effect of those risks on the project as a whole. Think of it this way. Qualitative analysis ranks the weight of individual stones, but quantitative analysis weighs the crushing impact of the entire avalanche. Not every project needs the simulation. It's often optional for simpler builds, but every project must use the clipboard. Next, let's dive deeper into that mathematical side for the massive builds that require it. When you are building a billion-dollar dam or a transcontinental railway, a simple high, medium, low ranking isn't enough for the stakeholders. They want numbers. Perform quantitative risk analysis is the process of numerically analyzing the aggregated effect of all identified risks. This isn't just about one event. It's about how 50 different risks might interact to push your completion date. Because of its complexity, this is used primarily on massive, strategically complex infrastructure builds. It isn't a requirement for every small site office. To make it work, you need high-quality baseline data. If your scope, schedule, or cost estimates are guesstimates, your simulation will be garbage in, garbage out. When done correctly, it generates probabilistic forecasts. Instead of saying, "we will finish in October," you can say, "there is a 75% chance of finishing by October." This is the only reliable method to assess your overall project risk exposure. But wait, there's a trap many people fall into when they see these powerful tools. Here is a classic trap that catches technical professionals every time. Imagine you're on a billion-dollar highway project. Your instinct says, this is too big for subjective guesswork. Skip the qualitative stuff and go straight to the quantitative models so we have hard data. In the world of PMI, that is a failing move. The reality is that qualitative analysis is mandatory for every single risk. It provides the prioritized baseline required to even decide which risks are worth the cost of quantitative modeling. On the exam, they will try to tempt you with a scenario where a new risk is found on a high-stakes project. They'll ask what you should do next. Your brain will want to pick the complex simulation or the math answer. Don't do it. The answer is always perform qualitative risk analysis. You must filter before you model. Now that we've analyzed the risks, it's time to decide how we're going to fight back. Identifying and analyzing a risk is useless if you don't have a plan to handle it. Plan risk responses is where we engineer our strategies. For threats, we have 4 main moves: mitigate, reduce the impact; avoid, change the plan to eliminate the threat; transfer, give the risk to someone else, like an insurance company; or accept, acknowledge it, and move on. But don't forget opportunities. We can exploit, enhance, or share a positive risk, like an early completion bonus. Every response must be 3 things: appropriate to the risk's severity, cost-effective, and owned by a single responsible person. Here's a professional tip. Every response creates a wave. This is what we call a secondary risk. For example, if you decide to mitigate the risk of a delay by hiring a second shift of workers, you've just created a new risk of increased site accidents or noise complaints from the community. This process also generates change requests to update your baselines and allocates the contingency reserves needed to fund these plans. Let's look at how these first few processes work together as a machine. I want you to stop thinking of risk management as a checklist and start seeing it as a continuous risk engine. It's a series of interlocking gears that must stay in motion until the project is closed. Gear 1 is identify. You are constantly logging new variables as the site evolves. Gear 2 is analyze. You filter those variables subjectively, and only then do you model them mathematically if required. Gear 3 is respond. You engineer the specific strategy to protect the project. This is not a milestone you reach and then forget. It is a life cycle. In agile delivery environments, this entire 3-gear loop runs before every single iteration or sprint. If you stop any one of these gears, the whole project becomes vulnerable. Risk management is the oil that keeps the gears of construction turning smoothly. Speaking of turning gears, sometimes we need to bring in outside help to get the job done, which brings us to procurement. In large-scale infrastructure, you rarely do everything yourself. Planned procurement management is the process of determining what goods or services you need to get from the outside, how you're going to get them, and when. This is driven by a rigorous make or buy analysis. Does it make more economic and structural sense to pour the concrete decks on site or buy them precast from a vendor? During this phase, you are establishing the Procurement Statement of Work, or SOW, and the source selection criteria. This is where you define the rules of engagement. It integrates heavily with your project schedule because vendor lead times, like the 6 months it might take to get a custom turbine, will dictate your critical path. You are building the legal and strategic framework before a single vendor is ever contacted. Just like with risk, there is a major trap here involving our favorite subcontractors. We've all been there. You have a subcontractor, like Apex Excavation, that you've used for a decade. They're reliable, they know the site, and you want them out there tomorrow. Your instinct says, just call the foreman and get them started to save time. On the PMI exam, this is a trap called bypassing procurement governance. The PMI reality is that all procurement must follow the documented procurement management plan no matter how much you like the vendor. You are required to have independent cost estimates and documented source selection criteria. PMI demands a formal, competitive, and documented process to ensure transparency and value. Past relationships are great for project success, but they do not allow you to bypass the rules. Fairness and process are the shields that protect you from claims of bias or corruption. Now let's pivot to the people who can truly make or break your project, the stakeholders. You can pour the most perfect concrete in the world, but if the local community hates the project, you're in trouble. Planned stakeholder engagement is about developing actionable approaches to involve people based on their specific needs, interests, and impact. We are moving beyond just who are they to how do we interact with them effectively. Think of this as a live map that requires constant updates. Triggers for updates include phase shifts, organizational changes, or new project impacts. We must recognize that a project's success is often defined by stakeholder perception, not just the physical progress on site. A community protest or a permit delay from a city council can stop a bulldozer faster than a geotechnical failure. Engagement is just as critical to your site progress as your soil surveys. But when things go wrong with these people, how do you handle it? Here is a trap that tests your leadership. Imagine a city council is threatening to block your highway permit. It feels like a high-level political issue, so your instinct might be to say, escalate this to the project sponsor immediately so they can handle it. On the exam, abdicating your responsibility like this is a trap target. The PMI reality is that the project manager owns stakeholder engagement. Before you ever hit the emergency button, you must analyze the root cause, consult your engagement plan, and attempt to communicate directly. You are the leader of the project. On the exam, never choose escalate to sponsor as your first action. Always analyze the situation, review your plan, and communicate first. Only after your defined processes have been exhausted do you look for higher help. Let's put this into practice with a simulation. Let's look at a realistic scenario. You're excavating a tunnel with a tunnel boring machine, or TBM, and the team discovers a geological formation, perhaps a pocket of unstable rock, that wasn't in the initial surveys. This discovery threatens to delay the project by 3 months. What should the project manager do first? A. Issue a change request for a schedule extension. B. Perform quantitative risk analysis to model the delay. C. Update the risk register with the new finding. Or D. Halt digging and escalate to the project sponsor. The correct answer is C. Update the risk register. Why? Because identify risks is an iterative process. You cannot analyze a risk, B, change your baselines, A, or escalate, D, until the new risk is formally documented. In the PMI world, if it isn't in the register, it doesn't exist yet for the purposes of the process engine. Document first, then solve. Let's try one more simulation, this time focusing on procurement. The scenario is simple. The PM is determining whether to pour bridge decking on site using the internal crew or to purchase precast decking from an external vendor. Which technique is the PM applying? Is it A, source selection criteria, B, make or buy analysis, C, cost-benefit analysis, or D, procurement strategy? The answer is B, make or buy analysis. While cost-benefit analysis, C, is a part of many decisions, make or buy is the specific data analysis technique used within the planned procurement management process to decide if work should be done internally or acquired from external sources. It's a fundamental tool for an infrastructure PM. Now let's wrap everything we've learned into a final checklist. As we conclude this session, let's look at your infrastructure checklist. For risk, remember that identification is continuous and involves everyone. Qualitative analysis is your subjective triage to find the owner, while quantitative math is for the big picture, only when needed. When you plan your responses, you are shielding the project and funding your contingencies, but always keep an eye out for those secondary risks. For procurement, it's all about the make or buy decision and documenting your criteria before you talk to vendors. And finally, for stakeholders, you must map the network and adapt as the project phases shift. The biggest takeaway today is to analyze the blueprint before you pour the concrete. In the world of professional project management, process must always triumph over instinct. Master these frameworks, and you won't just pass the exam, you'll lead more resilient, successful projects on the site.